an influencer is facing severe backlash from her audience after she faked her kidnapping for fun in December 2024. Victoria Rose, who goes by the nickname War Vicky and boasts 3.7 million followers and counting, posted a series of tweets which made it seem as though she had been abducted in Nigeria. One of the tweets stated, "I have kidnapped Vicky," while another demanded a $1 million ransom in return for the young woman's release. The fake tweets were deleted a short while later. During an Instagram live video, which has also since been deleted, Rose said, "We kind of got carried away with the joke. I don't drink or go to the club, so this is how I find my entertainment." She admitted that the hoax wasn't exactly tasteful, but said that she just wanted to have a little fun. Rose took a much more apologetic tone in a later post, which stated that she had failed to think things through and was now paying the consequences for it. She insisted that she didn't mean to portray Nigeria or black men in a negative light. The disgraced social media star said that she would be taking some time off from the internet to reflect, fast, and grow closer to God. But Rose didn't stay offline for long, as evidenced by her continued activity on Twitter and other social media platforms. She has also continued to attract controversy due to her posts, including a tweet about being kicked off a women's soccer team for not supporting LGBT youths, and another post about how she plans to start dressing modestly to reflect her Christian values. Number 30. Jed Foster. While responding to a stolen bike complaint in Berkshire, England, in August of 2019, 28-year-old police officer Andrew Harper's ankle got tangled in a strap trailing behind a passing vehicle. He was dragged to his death, and investigators identified 20-year-old Jed Foster as a prime suspect in the case after discovering incriminating text messages in his phone. The messages, which Foster had sent to his sister, seemed to indicate that he had played a direct role in the crime. He told the cops that it was just stupid, sick banter. But the police didn't believe him. 4 days after Harper's death, he was booked into custody on suspicion of murder. Foster spent the next 5 weeks behind bars before cell phone location data proved that he was away from the crime scene when Harper was killed. The charges against him were dropped and he was released from jail. At around the same time, authorities charged 3 teenagers in connection with the case. In July of 2020, nearly a year after Harper's death, defendants Henry Long, Albert Bowers, and Jesse Cole were convicted of manslaughter. Long was sentenced to 16 years in prison, while Bowers and Cole received 13-year sentences. And while Foster was undoubtedly thankful for his freedom, he and his family reportedly dealt with continued hatred and harassment from members of the public who were unconvinced of his innocence. Number 29. Zachary Scheich. In July of 2023, 26-year-old Zachary Scheich of Lincoln, Nebraska, was accused of attending 2 area high schools while posing as a 17-year-old. Going by the name Zach Hess, he enrolled at the schools during the 2022 to 2023 school year with help from a woman named Angela Navarro, who posed as his mother. He attended classes for 54 days while victimizing several underage female students. Police launched an investigation after receiving a tip about an adult impersonating a student. During a press conference following Scheich's arrest, a law enforcement spokesperson implied that the 5'4", 120-pound defendant had managed to blend in with the student body due to his small stature. Scheich was charged with 15 felonies in connection with 13 victims. In July of 2024, roughly a year after his arrest, he pled no contest to multiple charges, including child enticement with electronic communication, assault, and attempted assault. He was facing anywhere between 8 and 220 years in prison and was ultimately sentenced to at least 85 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 40 years. The convicted predator will become eligible for parole in 2069 when he's in his early 70s, and records list the projected release date of July 2086, at which point Scheich will be in his late 80s. Number 28. Karlton Johnson. A highly esteemed school principal with a track record of getting his students on track is facing allegations that he impersonated a sheriff's deputy in Broward County, Florida. 58-year-old Karlton Odell Johnson, who was named Principal of the Year in 2016, was pulled over along Florida's Turnpike in January 2025 when a state trooper noticed his darkly tinted windows, and altered license plate. According to the officer, Johnson flashed a wallet containing what looked like a badge and identified himself as a cop. When the trooper asked for Johnson's license, registration, and insurance, Johnson kept repeating that he was a member of law enforcement, stating, "I am one of you, and I thought we'd treat each other better." He allegedly claimed to work for the Broward County Sheriff's Office as a reserve deputy, while adding that he was Shaquille O'Neal's cousin. The Sheriff's Office confirmed that Johnson had never worked for the agency in any capacity, and Johnson was arrested on suspicion of fraud for falsely impersonating an official. He's been reassigned to a different job position pending the outcome of the case. Number 27. Javian Major and Sandy Broussard. In early 2024, 26-year-old Javian Major was arrested in Houston, Texas for scamming grieving victims out of their money by posing as a funeral director. He was charged with forgery, while an alleged accomplice, 38-year-old Sandy Broussard, was charged with theft. Law enforcement had launched a multi-agency investigation after the Texas Funeral Service Commission received multiple complaints about the suspects operating a funeral business without a license. The findings reportedly indicated that Major and Broussard were forging life insurance beneficiaries' signatures and collecting the money for themselves. According to investigators, Major gained victims' trust by convincing them that he was a funeral director. He persuaded his targets to give him money and to disclose the details of life insurance policies, while often failing to provide funeral services as promised. Victims described Major as a sharply dressed, smooth talker who sometimes portrayed himself as a friend of the deceased and came across as a legitimate businessman. In addition to their highly questionable financial practices, the suspects were accused of improperly embalming bodies, with one victim describing their loved one's body as bloated and recalling an unbearable odor of decomposition. Others have been unable to locate their loved one's remains. Shortly after their arrests, Major and Broussard were released on bond. Not long after that, however, the company that posted Major's $10,000 bond filed court documentation stating that it could no longer guarantee that he would appear in court due to his failures to check in with his bond agent. This also meant that the company was unable to reach Major through his listed contact information or cosigner. The judge issued a warrant for Major's arrest, but he still was not in custody in September of 2024 when he reached out to the relatives of a shooting victim, offering to connect them with a reputable funeral home. Unaware of the allegations against Major, the family paid him $7,000 to arrange the victim's funeral, only to realize they had been duped. Prosecutors argued that Major violated a bond clause prohibiting him from working in any capacity in the funeral industry, while his defense attorney claimed that his client had simply acted as a middleman who helped connect the family to a legitimate business. The funeral home that Major claimed to be associated with refused reports' requests for comment, and the case appears to be ongoing. Number 26. Laurie Leigh Shaver. In early 2018, a concerned civilian contacted the Lake County, Florida Sheriff's Office and requested a welfare check on their friend, Michael Shaver. For 3 years, Michael had only interacted with his friends and family through social media. No one had seen him in person. Deputies paid a visit to Michael's last known address in Claremont, where they were met by his wife, Laurie Leigh Shaver, who said that Michael had abandoned her and their children to be with another woman. Laurie had remarried in 2016 and claimed that she hadn't heard from Michael since November 2015, when he quit his job via email, turned his back on his family, and left to start his new life with his unnamed mystery lover. When law enforcement asked to search the property with cadaver dogs, however, Laurie's behavior became suspicious. After initially allowing deputies to look around without dogs, she refused to let them bring canines to the property. They returned less than a month later with a search warrant, a team of cadaver dogs, and ground-penetrating radar. During the search, they found Michael's body buried in the backyard beneath a concrete fire pit. In a macabre twist, Laurie had married her new husband in a backyard ceremony in 2016, just inches from where Michael was buried. According to an autopsy report, Michael had suffered a single gunshot wound to the head, anywhere from several months to several years prior to the discovery of his remains. Long after anyone had last seen Michael alive, his social media accounts had remained active, which was a major reason why it took so long for anyone to contact law enforcement. Further investigation revealed that Laurie had drained Michael's bank accounts and sold a number of his prized belongings in the wake of his disappearance. Following the discovery of Michael's body, the investigation continued for another 2 years before prosecutors charged Laurie with second-degree murder, domestic violence, and accessory after the fact. Laurie adamantly maintained her innocence, even releasing a YouTube video pleading with the public for donations toward her defense costs. She accused the authorities of railroading her and portrayed herself as a loving, caring, and non-judgmental person who would never harm the father of her children. But many people felt much differently about Laurie, including a friend of Michael's who described her as a jealous and evil person who had attacked Michael on more than one occasion prior to his disappearance. The case languished in court for another 4 years before going to trial during the summer of 2024. During the proceedings, Laurie's defense attorney argued that just because Michael's murdered body was found in the family's backyard didn't mean that Laurie was the killer. He blamed the defendant's daughter, who was 7 years old at the time of Michael's death, and the girl testified that she had pulled the trigger when she saw Michael abusing her mother. Unconvinced by these claims, the jury found 41-year-old Laurie guilty of second-degree murder. She was sentenced to life without parole and has yet to admit her guilt. Number 25. Reyel Eugene Lovejoy. In August of 2023, a 72-year-old Texas man named Reyel Eugene Lovejoy was accused of practicing medicine without a license. His arrest came after investigators learned about a phony COVID vaccine exemption letter he allegedly gave to a woman who said she didn't pay for the document and that Lovejoy simply handed it to her. The fraudulent exemption certificate contained bogus credentials, including a fake license number. Additionally, the witness told police that Lovejoy claimed to be in the military and that she saw him wearing a military-like outfit with ribbons and medals attached to it. Lovejoy was arrested again in April of 2024. This time he was accused of impersonating a federal agent, a British intelligence agent, and a doctor. According to law enforcement, Lovejoy identified himself as a federal agent when they went to serve a warrant for his previous charge. He produced a fake badge as well as an ID listing him as a member of a bail recovery team. While searching Lovejoy, the police also found several other fake IDs, including one that claimed he worked for the president and another identifying him as a member of the British Secret Intelligence Service, or SIS. In addition to the charge for practicing without a license, Lovejoy was charged with impersonating a public servant. As a condition of his bond, he's banned from posing as a federal agent, a cop, or a medical professional. Number 24. Kelcie Miller. During the spring of 2019, members of the Madison County, Illinois Public Defender's Office told law enforcement that they had caught one of their employees practicing law without a license. Identified by investigators as 26-year-old Kelcie Miller, the suspected fraudster had worked on at least 80 criminal cases between October of 2018 and May of 2019. She obtained her job by using fake documents that made it appear as though she was qualified to work as an attorney, when in reality she had failed the bar exam twice. Miller's lack of credentials went unnoticed for 7 months until a judge looked her up on the Illinois Attorney Registration and Disciplinary Commission at the request of a reporter who wanted to confirm the spelling of the young woman's first name. The judge couldn't find any record of her being a licensed attorney, and she was subsequently charged with felony counts of theft over $10,000 of government property, false impersonation of an attorney, and forgery. Public defender John Rakowski told the Belleville News-Democrat that this was the first time one of his employees had lied to him about their qualifications. He later told Fox 2 Now that when he found out Miller wasn't a real lawyer, he felt almost ill. Rakowski said he planned to properly check all his applicants' credentials moving forward, and while Miller undoubtedly broke the law by lying about being a lawyer, no one ever complained about her during her employment with the Public Defender's Office. Most of the defendants whose cases she worked on were happy with the outcomes, while a handful of cases were reconciled. In early 2020, Miller pleaded guilty to 1 count of false personation of an attorney. She was sentenced to probation in order to repay the $40,000 in pay and benefits she received as the result of her deception. Number 23. Wayne Shelby Simmons. In the early 2000s, self-proclaimed former CIA agent Wayne Shelby Simmons became a regular commentator on Fox News regarding national security and intelligence matters. He claimed he had spent nearly 3 decades working for the agency as an undercover operative, but he was never actually a CIA agent. His lies went unnoticed until a former CIA agent named Kent Clisby saw through his claims after the two met in 2010. Suspicions against Simmons slowly spread, but another 5 years went by before he was arrested on federal fraud charges. During that time period, he landed 2 jobs in Afghanistan with defense contractors, and in 2013 he was an appointed member of a civilian panel tasked with investigating the attacks on U.S. government facilities in Benghazi, Libya. That same year, a woman reported Simmons to the authorities for stealing her money in a real estate scam. During the investigation that ensued, detectives did a deep dive into his work history and uncovered evidence of his lies. Federal prosecutors later described Simmons as a fraud with no military or intelligence experience. In 2015, Simmons was arrested for defrauding the woman who reported him out of $125,000 and fraudulently obtaining employment with military contractors. He was also accused of falsely portraying past petty crimes as undercover operations. For example, Simmons wrote about a supposed political extortion, drug and gun trafficking investigation called Operation Iranian Trust. In reality, prosecutors claimed that he was just a doorman at a nightclub who sold cocaine on the side. In July of 2016, Simmons pleaded guilty to wire fraud, major fraud against the U.S. government, and the gun charge. He was sentenced to 33 months in prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. He was also ordered to pay restitution and forfeit any criminal proceeds. During his sentencing hearing, he apologized for lying about certain things, including his top-secret security clearance, his finances, and his criminal history, but he stood by his claim that he had worked for the CIA and that his work was so secretive that there was never any recorded record of it. Number 22. Larry Price. 42-year-old developer Larry Price was once known for leading the construction of the largest mansion ever built in Billings, Montana. He was living in Bluefield, Virginia, when his wife, Amy, reported him missing at 2 in the morning on April 18, 2018. No one had seen Price since 8 p.m. the night before, and local law enforcement launched a ground and air search. Police tracked Price's cell phone to his car in Tazewell County, where they found the vehicle in a parking lot. Price was located along a roadside the following night and taken to the hospital, where he told officers that he had been abducted by 2 male strangers. He indicated that the kidnapping might have stemmed from a debt he owed and later changed his story to suggest that the culprits were members of the Pagans Motorcycle Club. In this version of events, Price claimed that the men had held a chemical-soaked rag in his face and drove him to his motorcycle shop, where they forced him to open the safe. He also said that his captors had coerced him into using his railroad connections to traffic methamphetamine. But video footage showed no signs of a disturbance at the shop, and a woman who worked at a local restaurant told investigators that she and Price were having an affair. She admitted that Price had fantasized about leaving his life behind and starting anew, and that she had recently bought some items for that purpose, including a cell phone. Federal prosecutors accused Price of faking his kidnapping in a bid to disappear with his mistress and charged him with giving false statements to investigators. Further investigation revealed that Price was trying to escape angry investors who he had scammed out of an estimated $20,000 by promising unrealistically high returns on their coal investments. He had conspired with the president and several executives of the Signal Peak Energy Coal Company, who, in addition to the embezzlement activities, were accused of bribery, cocaine trafficking, gun crimes, safety and environmental violations, and other questionable activities. Price and 8 other former Signal Peak executives were charged with crimes based on the investigation's findings. In December of 2018, Price pleaded guilty to 5 charges, including 3 counts of wire fraud, conspiracy to commit money laundering, and false official statement. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. Number 21. Brian Rini. While responding to a call about a suspicious male in April of 2019, police in Newport, Kentucky encountered a young man claiming to be Timothy Pitson, who had vanished 8 years earlier. Pitson would have been 14 years old if he was still alive, and the man claiming his identity told police that he had just escaped from captors who had trafficked him for illicit gains. He refused to provide his fingerprints but consented to the collection of a DNA sample. The DNA results proved that the man wasn't Pitson, but the suspect initially tried to stand by his claim. He eventually admitted that he had lied about his identity and that he had learned about Pitson from a recent rerun of ABC's 2020. Authorities identified the suspect as 23-year-old Brian Rini, who had recently been released from prison after serving time for burglary and vandalism. He had a history of legal trouble and using other people's identities and he was now facing charges for pretending to be Pitson. The missing boy's family had briefly gotten their hopes up that Pitson had finally been found, and they were crushed to learn that it was a hoax. The real Pitson's mother, Amy Fry Pitson, had signed him out of an Aurora, Illinois elementary school one day in 2011. 3 days later, Amy was found dead, along with a note stating that Timothy would never be found. In January of 2020, Rini pleaded guilty to aggravated identity theft in federal court. He was sentenced to a 2-year mandatory minimum sentence that the charge carries, followed by a year of supervised release. Charges of lying to FBI agents were dropped in exchange for his guilty plea, sparing him from the potential 8-year sentence that he would have originally faced if convicted as charged. Number 20. Reyel Simmons. In August of 2021, the keen-eyed girlfriend of 53-year-old Reyel Simmons saw a comment on one of his TikTok videos accusing him of stolen valor. Up until that point, the woman believed Simmons was a Department of Homeland Security agent and a retired Navy SEAL, and so did most of his nearly 10,000 TikTok followers who watched his videos about his chosen profession. But now, Simmons' girlfriend had her doubts. She reached out to the person who left the stolen valor comment, who identified themselves as Simmons' former co-worker. The ex-colleague informed the girlfriend of Simmons' past arrest in Colorado for impersonating law enforcement, and she tipped off the FBI to the continued ruse. An investigation turned up no evidence that Simmons ever served in the military or worked in law enforcement. Yet he had cited false credentials as a former Homeland Security agent in order to land work in Minnesota. The Department of Homeland Security wasn't established until 2 years after Simmons claimed his employment there ended, and he had cited non-existent federal laws on a job application, along with an explanation about his previous work being classified. During a raid of Simmons' property, agents discovered a shooting range and an arsenal of weapons, even though he was banned from owning guns due to his status as a convicted felon. When the authorities arrested him at his workplace, they found his so-called go bag, which contained a gun and was adorned with fake military and government patches. In January of 2022, Simmons pleaded guilty to 1 count each of impersonating an officer of the United States and possessing firearms as a felon. He was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison. Number 19. Jeannine Jaramillo. In March of 2022, the driver of a white Chevy Malibu led police on a wrong-way pursuit on Interstate 25 outside Santa Fe, New Mexico. The pursuit reached speeds of over 90 miles per hour before the driver lost control of the vehicle and crashed, killing 43-year-old officer Robert Duran and 62-year-old retired firefighter Frank Lovato. A woman who climbed out of the Malibu, 46-year-old Jeannine Jaramillo, claimed that her boyfriend Mark Lopez had been driving at the time of the crash and had fled the scene on foot. She told officers that Lopez had kidnapped her and doused her in gasoline, but her clothing didn't smell like gas and she had no visible injuries, causing investigators to suspect that she was lying. Jaramillo was also unable to provide officers with her boyfriend's contact information, which only furthered their suspicions that she was being deceptive. The Malibu involved in the accident was stolen, and Jaramillo had been involved in a similar incident just months earlier. In September of 2021, in the previous incident, she had crashed a stolen car into a fence and led police on a wrong-way chase. The pursuit was called off due to safety reasons, and when investigators caught up with Jaramillo, she claimed that a man named David Lopez had been driving. Much like the more recent incident, Jaramillo told the cops that she had been held at knife point, but there was no evidence of anyone else being in the vehicle, and she was arrested on multiple charges. In that case, Jaramillo pleaded guilty to aggravated fleeing and unlawful taking of a motor vehicle in exchange for an 18-month prison sentence. Following an investigation into the more recent collision that killed Duran and Lovato, Jaramillo was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. In December 2024, she was found guilty as charged and sentenced to a minimum of 60 years in prison. Jaramillo interrupted the judge repeatedly while the punishment was being handed down, at one point saying, repeatedly, "I was trying to get on the freeway the right way." The judge issued her a warning to stop interrupting her, but Jaramillo chimed in with her unsolicited 2 cents at least 2 more times. During the hearing, in January 2025, she appealed her conviction, arguing in her court filing that New Mexico case law does not support her convictions. The appeal also argues that jurors should not have been told about the similar incident that had occurred just months before the deadly crash. Jaramillo's attorney has since withdrawn from the case, and she will be represented by a public defender moving forward. Number 18. Jonathan Becker. On September 9th, 2023, the driver of a Ford Explorer SUV that closely resembled a law enforcement vehicle activated a set of flashing lights and pulled up behind an Indianapolis Metropolitan Police sergeant who was driving in an unmarked car. The sergeant pulled over and the man behind the wheel of the Explorer drove past. Later identified as 23-year-old Jonathan Becker, the suspect was later seen in a construction zone, along with several other men, all of whom were dressed in police-like uniforms. The same sergeant who had crossed paths with Becker earlier that day accused him of impersonating a police officer, but Becker denied the allegation and accused the sergeant of speeding. He continued having an attitude toward the sergeant and other officers who responded to the scene as backup, and was charged with impersonating a police officer and operating a motor vehicle with a false plate. The case was still ongoing a year later when Becker was arrested again for the same charge. In October 2024, police detectives spotted a white police-like SUV parked in the middle of a street on the city's east side. Its flashing lights were activated and Becker was seen exiting the vehicle multiple times to direct traffic while dressed in the same type of outfit he had been wearing during his arrest a year earlier. In addition to his ongoing case, Becker was wanted on a warrant for a gun charge out of Hancock County. While arresting him on the outstanding warrant, officers found a loaded Glock handgun in his possession. Inside his car, they found police business cards, an incident notepad labeled police, red and blue LED lights in the driver's side visor, a siren box, and other law enforcement gear. Becker is now facing additional charges of impersonating a law enforcement officer and unlawful carrying of a handgun. Number 17. Bonnie Sweeten. In 2009, Bonnie Sweeten of Bucks County, Pennsylvania, called law enforcement and claimed that she and her 9-year-old daughter had been kidnapped. She told the dispatcher that they were both riding in the trunk of their captor's vehicle after being abducted by 2 men. In reality, Sweeten and her daughter were on their way to Disney World in Orlando, Florida. Investigators soon discovered that Sweeten had obtained a driver's license and plane tickets using a former co-worker's identity. She was trying to escape allegations that she had stolen more than $1 million from family, friends, and her job. The day after Sweeten made the bogus 911 call, police tracked her down and arrested her at Disney's Grand Floridian Resort. She was convicted of the kidnapping hoax and the money theft and was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. Sweeten made news headlines again in 2022 when she was accused of embezzling money from yet another employer. She was charged with 2 counts of wire fraud in federal court. Prosecutors accused Sweeten of forging checks and making fraudulent purchases with a company credit card while working as a bookkeeper. The company owner was an old friend of Sweeten's who had hired her shortly after her release from prison in 2017. Speaking with 6 Action News after Sweeten's 2022 arrest, he said that he wanted to give Sweeten a second chance at life after she paid her debt to society. He was slow to notice the theft, only to realize in hindsight that it had started very shortly after he hired the woman. The business owner finally noticed the shady activity after a credit card company contacted him about paying off charges on a card Sweeten had opened in his name. He dug deeper into his finances and was alarmed to discover the extent of Sweeten's fraudulent activity, which included a forged document giving her complete power of attorney over his money and assets. Updates on the case have not been forthcoming, but records show that Sweeten is not currently in federal custody. If convicted as charged in her most recent case, she could face up to 40 years in prison. Number 16. Frederic Pierre Bourdin. Nobody knows exactly how many false identities French serial imposter Frederic Pierre Bourdin has taken on over his lifetime, but the number is estimated to be anywhere from a few dozen to 500. Nicknamed the Chameleon, Bourdin began stealing identities as a child in an attempt to gain the attention he didn't receive from his distracted mother. He pulled off his biggest con to date in 1997 when he convinced the authorities that he was a missing American teenager named Nicholas Barclay, who had vanished in San Antonio, Texas, while walking home from a basketball game in 1994. After landing in police custody in Spain, Bourdin claimed that he was a missing American teenager who had just escaped a human trafficking ring. He was kept in a shelter overnight, during which time he called the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children in Virginia. Posing as a shelter worker, he claimed he was trying to identify an American teen in his custody. Based on the details Bourdin provided, the center suggested that the fictional child might be Barclay. At the time, Bourdin was 23 years old. He had an established record as a serial con artist, which was why he didn't want to give the authorities his real name. In addition to being older than Barclay, he had brown eyes. Barclay's eyes were blue. So Bourdin claimed that his kidnappers had forcibly dyed his eyes brown in order to obscure his identity, and he explained away his French accent by claiming that he had been forbidden from speaking English during his 3 years in captivity. US authorities flew to Spain with his sister to pick him up. Convinced that he was who he claimed to be, they flew him to Texas, where the rest of Barclay's family waited eagerly to reunite with him at the airport. Nobody questioned the differences between the boy who had disappeared 3 years earlier and the young man standing in front of them, even when something seemed off about his behavior. The family chalked it up to the trauma he had supposedly endured. The first person to question Bourdin's identity was a local private investigator named Charlie Parker, who spotted obvious differences in appearance. Federal authorities also became suspicious when they interviewed Bourdin as part of their investigation into his alleged kidnapping. Barclay's family remained convinced that no mistakes had been made until shortly before Bourdin's arrest. 5 months later, he served 6 years in federal prison for passport fraud and perjury and was deported to France after his release in 2003. Bourdin told investigators that Barclay's mother, Beverly, and his brother Jason seemed unexplainably spooked when he arrived in the US. At first, he wondered if it was because they knew he wasn't Barclay, but he later began to suspect that Beverly and Jason knew what had happened to the missing teen and that he was no longer alive. Nicholas Barclay remains missing to this day, and no arrests have been made in his case. After returning to Europe, Bourdin impersonated at least 3 more missing teens, but appears to have stopped stealing identities after 2005. Number 15. Quinn Gray. As a highly successful businessman, Reed Allen Gray was able to provide his family with an extravagant lifestyle, which included a seaside mansion in Ponte Verde, Florida. But his life took a terrifying turn one day in 2009 when he arrived home from work to find a troubling note left behind by his wife, 36-year-old Quinn Hannah Gray. The note stated that Quinn had been kidnapped and instructed not to cooperate with the police. It also ordered Reed to comply with the abductor's demands for a $50,000 ransom. After 3 days of failed negotiations between Reed and the supposed kidnappers, Quinn appeared in a parking lot. She was physically unharmed but hysterical. Quinn accused a 25-year-old gas station employee named Jasmine Osmanovich of holding her hostage in a motel room. But the motel manager said that Quinn didn't seem distressed during her stay, and Osmanovich gave police audio recordings proving that he and Quinn were having an affair and that they staged the kidnapping in an attempt to extort Reed Gray. Reed initially stood by his wife despite the mounting allegations against her. He largely blamed Osmanovich while excusing Quinn's behavior based on her mental health, but over time, it became increasingly clear that Quinn was not a victim, and Reed ultimately ended up divorcing her. Jasmine Osmanovich pleaded guilty to extortion in 2011 and was sentenced to 6 years of probation. Quinn pleaded no contest to the same charge and was sentenced to 7 years of probation, which came with a strict ban on alcohol consumption after the court learned how her drinking habit had propelled her self-destructive activities. The defendants were also ordered to pay $43,000 each to cover the cost of the investigation into the fake kidnapping. Number 14. Amber Morrison. In April 2021, police in Killeen, Texas, received a complaint from an attorney named Amber Marie Morrison, who accused an unknown individual of impersonating her using her bar license number and credentials. According to a report, a female suspect identifying herself as Amber Morrison or K. Morrison had used the real Amber Morrison's information in an attempt to gain clients and on a rental property application. The property owner, Charity Holman, contacted police after she was unable to verify that the applicant was a real lawyer. She told investigators that the suspect had struggled to provide the proof of income necessary to qualify as a renter, which only furthered her suspicions that the woman was who she claimed to be. Detectives eventually narrowed their sights on 36-year-old Amber K. Morrison, who stands accused of impersonating the Houston-based attorney who had complained about her, Amber Marie Morrison. She was arrested on identity fraud and impersonation charges in 2022, and further investigation revealed evidence of bigamy and other questionable activities. According to authorities, Amber K. Morrison has been married at least 4 times since 2008. Her first husband, Joshua Shoemaker, filed for divorce in 2013 but was unable to locate Morrison to serve the paperwork. The divorce was granted later that year, but Morrison was apparently unaware of this. She filed for divorce from Shoemaker in 2017, by which point she had been married to her second husband, Andrew Martin, for over a year. In October of 2017, while still legally married to Martin, Morrison married her third husband, David Johnson. By the time Martin divorced Morrison in 2020, Morrison and Johnson had been married for 3 years. As of late 2024, Morrison is married to her fourth husband, Michael Kripsik. Even though her divorce from Johnson is ongoing, Morrison is facing numerous criminal charges and is currently in custody at the McLennan County Jail. According to the most recent available updates on her case, she was ordered to undergo a psychiatric evaluation to determine whether she's competent to proceed in court. Number 13. Richard Hoagland. Married father of 4 and businessman Richard Hoagland vanished one evening in February 1993 after telling his wife that he was going to the hospital. He left the couple's home outside Indianapolis and simply never returned. Most of Hoagland's belongings were left behind, including his passport, indicating that he left the house with little more than the clothes on his back. The mystery deepened when his car was found abandoned outside the Indianapolis airport. Hoagland mailed birthday cards to his kids that summer and never contacted his family again. In 2003, 10 years after he disappeared, he was declared legally dead. His fate and whereabouts remained a mystery until 2016, when his family received a call from law enforcement in Pasco County, Florida. As it turned out, Hoagland was alive and well. He had been caught living under the alias of a deceased man named Terry Jude Szymanski. Hoagland's identity theft was discovered after Szymanski's nephew performed an Ancestry.com search and discovered that a man with the same name as his uncle was living in Florida. Szymanski's family was scared that the imposter might try to harm them, so they stayed silent for several years before finally complaining to the police. After abandoning his wife and kids, Hoagland traveled to Florida, where he rented an efficiency apartment from Szymanski's father. Szymanski had passed away 2 years earlier in a fishing accident, and his grieving dad opened up to Hoagland about it. At some point, Hoagland found Szymanski's death certificate and used it to steal his identity. During the nearly 25 years he spent living as Szymanski, Hoagland remarried, had a son, bought a house on the Gulf Coast, and became a landlord. When a detective showed up at the 63-year-old's house and presented him with Szymanski's death certificate, Hoagland admitted to the identity fraud. He said he left Indiana to get away from his first wife, and his second wife was completely unaware about his past, including the family he had left behind. In 2017, Hoagland pleaded guilty to aggravated identity theft and was sentenced to 2 years in federal prison. After serving his time, he returned to Indiana, where a judge awarded his first wife a $1.86 million child support judgment. By then, Hoagland's second wife was in the process of divorcing him, leaving it unclear whether any of his money or assets would go toward satisfying his 7-figure debt to his first wife. Number 12. Karla Carbo. 30-year-old Karla Carbo has never been licensed to practice law in Utah, but this didn't stop her from setting up shop in West Valley City, where she owned a law office and advertised her services. She represented at least 5 clients in divorce and criminal cases while using a real lawyer's identity and credentials. Carbo was arrested in December of 2014 after the lawyer whose information she was using received an email from a court clerk about a case she was unfamiliar with. The attorney contacted the authorities and an investigation was launched. Carbo originally faced at least 12 felony charges. In September of 2015, she pleaded guilty to 4 fraud and forgery charges, while the remaining 8 counts were dropped. The judge imposed a 1 to 15-year prison sentence but suspended the term in lieu of 90 days in jail with credit for time served and 3 years of probation. In order to satisfy the terms of her probation, Carbo was required to serve 75 hours of community service, pay more than $7,000 in restitution to her clients, and attend treatment for theft issues. She was also banned from working in any legal-related profession. Number 11. Samantha Martinez. In early December of 2016, Miami police appealed to the public for information about a 20-year-old missing woman named Samantha A. Martinez, who they believed had been abducted and was in danger. Martinez had been reported missing by her boyfriend, Jonathan Johnson, who told law enforcement that he hadn't heard from Martinez in 4 days, but had received a suspicious text message about her. The message came from someone identifying themselves only as Skeet and stated that something had gone awry during a drug deal. In it, the sender claimed they were holding Martinez captive and that they weren't going to release her until they received $300. Johnson also received a seemingly hysterical and distressed voicemail from Martinez urging him to pay the money that was being demanded of him. At the time, Johnson was homeless. He couldn't afford the payment, so he consulted with his pastor and family members and went to the police at their urging. A few days later, Johnson called the police and said that he had made contact with Martinez, who was at a local hospital. Martinez claimed she had been assaulted, but her story began to unravel while she was being questioned by police. She eventually admitted that she had faked her abduction to get revenge on Johnson for his infidelity. During her absence, she had stayed with a friend and had slept with her host to get back at her boyfriend. Additionally, she confessed to lying about the assault and admitted that Scheich didn't really exist. Martinez was charged with one count of making a false report to police. She was initially released on her own recognizance, but was arrested again for attacking an NBC Miami camera person as she left the jail. No charges were pressed, and Martinez was released again after being briefly detained. Number 10. Nathan Chambers. In June of 2024, 30-year-old Nathan Lee Chambers was accused of posing as a lawyer and represented a criminal defendant in Greenville, South Carolina between June and November of 2023. According to authorities, he forged the name of his father, a real attorney named John Edward Chambers Jr., on legal documents that he unlawfully filed with the solicitor's office. In an ironic twist, Chambers had represented a man who was being held in contempt for giving legal advice to his fiancée. He was charged with forgery, unauthorized practice of law, and misrepresentation of being a lawyer to solicit business, obtain anything of value, or provide legal advice. During a contempt hearing about a month after his arrest, in July of 2024, a judge accused Chambers of using artificial intelligence to draft the documents that he filed under his father's name. Chambers apologized but did not admit or deny the AI allegation. While it's unclear whether the elder Chambers knew his son was impersonating him, the law firm that the father worked for reportedly suspected him of being involved and distanced itself from him in the aftermath of Nathan's arrest. Number 9. Abay Holmes. In September of 2020, authorities in Baldwin County, Georgia, announced the arrest of 21-year-old Abay Holmes for posing as a high school freshman. According to reports, Holmes had enrolled in classes at a local school after convincing a woman that he was a homeless teenager. The woman took him in at her Milledgeville home, and Holmes was given a laptop in order to complete his classwork. His new living arrangement fell apart just days later, however, when his host kicked him out for being disrespectful. Holmes tried taking the laptop with him, but the woman called the authorities in an effort to return it to the school district. Because Holmes claimed to be a minor, the Department of Family and Child Services got involved, and his true identity was discovered when he was fingerprinted. Just 3 years earlier, Holmes was a star football player at an Atlanta area high school. He was recruited to play college football, but was expelled from the university following a string of car break-ins on campus. After the incident involving the laptop, the accused fraudster was charged with giving law enforcement a false name and birthday and making false statements on documents. A police spokesperson said that there was no evidence of Holmes trying to access minors, leaving his motive a mystery. Number 8. Cristian Perez Latorre. In August of 2024, Los Angeles District Attorney George Gascoigne announced charges against 53-year-old Cristian Perez Latorre, who is accused of performing cosmetic surgery without a license on a female patient in July of 2021. 10 days after the surgery, Latorre treated the woman for an infection resulting from the procedure. A month after the operation, the victim was still experiencing complications, which Latorre treated her for. Latorre boasted a luxurious lifestyle on Instagram, where he has tens of thousands of followers. He also offered advice on Botox and other cosmetic surgeries in videos that were posted to his social media accounts. In his profiles, he advertised himself as a registered nurse first assistant in the US and plastic surgeon board certified in Argentina. Latorre faces 6 counts of practicing medicine without a certification and 1 count each of assault with a deadly weapon and battery with serious injury. He could face up to 10 years in prison if convicted as charged, and is currently free on a $150,000 bond amid the ongoing case. Number 7. Alexandria Duval. While driving along a cliffside road in Maui in late May of 2016, 37-year-old twin sisters Alexandria and Anastasia Duval got into a fight. As the sisters yelled at one another, the SUV veered off the road and plunged 200 feet to the ground below. Anastasia died from her injuries, while Alexandria, who was driving at the time of the accident, walked away with relatively minor injuries. 5 days after the deadly crash, police arrested Alexandria on suspicion of murder. Prosecutors accused her of deliberately driving off the cliff, citing a lack of indicators that she had tried to brake before plowing through the guardrail. The judge dropped the case a few days later due to a lack of evidence, but prosecutors re-brought the charges against Alexandria later that year. Born as Allison and Ann Dadao, Alexandria and Anastasia ran yoga studios together in multiple states in the years leading up to the tragedy. They ran a successful business in Florida, which eventually went bust after they rented a bigger space at the urging of the producers of a reality TV show, which never came to fruition. Unable to afford the rent, the sisters left Florida and moved to Utah, where they changed their names with plans to write a book. Despite being close, they were known for fighting viciously with one another, including during an intoxicated police encounter in 2014. Alexandria and Anastasia moved to Hawaii in December of 2015 on a religious quest. On Christmas Eve of that year, they were arrested for disorderly conduct and terroristic threatening. During Alexandria's bench trial for the murder charge in January 2018, Anastasia's boyfriend, Federico Bailey, described how the sisters began fighting after Alexandria showed up uninvited while he and Anastasia were camping together. The disagreement supposedly lasted for hours as Alexandria and Anastasia left the campsite, returned, and left again shortly before the accident. Bailey testified that the defendant had dressed up as her twin and flirted with him shortly after Anastasia's death, claiming that Alexandria cuddled up on him, lay her head on his shoulder, and that it seemed like she was flirting with him. He also told the court that Alexandria put on Anastasia's clothes and dodged his questions about the accident that had killed her sister. Much to the prosecution's dismay, the judge overseeing the case found Alexandria not guilty, and she left the courtroom a free woman. The decision came following several days of testimony from witnesses, including onlookers, who recalled seeing Anastasia pulling Alexandria's hair when the SUV suddenly veered off the cliff. Several onlookers said that they could hear Alexandria calling for help and yelling that she needed a psychiatrist shortly before the incident, despite Bailey's apparent belief that Alexandria had acted with malice. Number 6. Ivan Mariotti. In October 2024, 44-year-old Italian national Ivan Mariotti was arrested for impersonating a security guard to get into a Taylor Swift concert at the Hard Rock Stadium in Miami Gardens, Florida. An officer spotted him wearing a suit and a badge around his neck and asked him why he was wearing a badge. Mariotti said he had been hired by 4 women as a security guard and that he had escorted them to their seats despite not being a ticket holder himself. Officers asked Mariotti to point out the 4 women who had hired him and ended up speaking to 2 women who identified Mariotti as a driver that their aunt had hired for the evening. They didn't know why Mariotti was wearing a badge and confirmed that they had intended to hire a driver, not a security guard. Mariotti reportedly claimed to work for several companies while being escorted out of the concert venue. He was booked into custody on charges of falsely impersonating an officer and interference with a sporting or entertainment event, as well as a federal immigration hold. Number 5. Garrison Courtney. For years, Garrison Courtney posed as a CIA agent while convincing contractors to hire him as part of a non-existent top-secret program. Using at least 5 aliases, he persuaded his targets to put him on their payroll as a way to fund an off-the-books classified task force and promised to reimburse them with government funds. The scheme was so convincing that Courtney profited to the tune of at least $4.4 million. And his victims were so convinced of his authenticity that they initially refused to speak with investigators after his lies started bubbling to the surface. Courtney kept around $1 million of the proceeds for himself while using the remaining $3.4 million to keep his deception going. It essentially functioned as a giant Ponzi scheme with its participants unaware of its illegal nature. Courtney was finally caught after a high-ranking Air Force intelligence lieutenant general became suspicious of the scheme. He tipped off the authorities, and an extensive investigation involving 10 agencies was launched. In June of 2020, Courtney pleaded guilty to his crimes. He continued with his deception while awaiting sentencing by contacting one of his former contractors under a fake name and trying to convince them that he was a legitimate but burned asset to the CIA. He was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison. Number 4. Pamela Reed. In January of 2024, a 41-year-old Ohio woman named Pamela Reed was accused of pretending that her wealthy daughter had cancer. According to an affidavit, Reed provided documents about the girl's alleged illness to her school. She also reportedly claimed that her daughter had gone blind in one eye and would soon have a port implanted in her body for future cancer treatments. Concerned over these claims and the student's extensive absences, the school contacted the girl's doctor, who confirmed that she did not have cancer and that the documentation Reed had provided was fraudulent. By then, Reed had become very vocal on social media about her daughter's supposed diagnosis and had sought donations through fundraisers, with one generous non-profit handing over $8,000 for medical costs. When confronted by law enforcement, Reed initially stood by her story about her daughter being sick, but she eventually admitted that it was all a lie. She confessed to shaving her daughter's hair and obtaining anti-epileptic medications that her daughter likely did not even need. Reed also admitted to falsifying documents. Both of her kids were home when police visited, and they fully believed that one of them was gravely ill. Reed was charged with theft by deception, telecommunications fraud, and endangering children, grand theft, and 8 counts of forgery. The current status of the case is unclear. Number 3. Antonio Marriott Wilson. The women who dated romance swindler Antonio Marriott Wilson between 2015 and 2018 knew him as either Bryce Carrington or Dr. Tony Marriott. During that time, Wilson scammed at least 4 victims, including Blackish actress Jennifer Lewis. He posed as a Navy SEAL, an Oxford graduate, a Bible scholar, and a UCLA professor. Despite being none of these things, Wilson also convinced women that he was an up-and-coming entrepreneur and that big-name companies like ABC and EA Games had utilized his services as a software developer and audio engineer. He claimed to have backing from high-profile investors to the tune of tens of millions of dollars. Believing that Wilson's next big success was just around the corner, his unsuspecting girlfriends invested large amounts of money in his businesses, which turned out to be total shams. Wilson used the ill-gotten money to finance his lavish lifestyle and pay his bills, while cleverly hiding the fact that he had already served federal time for fraud. After his first prison stint, Wilson defrauded his second batch of victims out of at least $387,000. He pleaded guilty to 1 count of wire fraud in 2021 and received an 8-year prison sentence and was ordered to pay $272,000 in restitution to 3 of his victims who have yet to receive their money. Number 2. Eric Sinotti. In 2021, a North Carolina man named Eric Sinotti was arrested for impersonating a police officer in Navassa. Despite not being a sworn officer, he managed to show up at a medical call in a Navassa police vehicle. He was wearing a bulletproof vest and sporting a badge and a gun. Further investigation revealed that Sinotti had been making unauthorized traffic stops with a vehicle he had accessed as a town volunteer. He was clocked at speeds as high as 107 miles per hour, and his conduct raised concerns among angry civilians about how he obtained a police vehicle and official-looking gear. Sinotti entered an offered plea to 3 felony charges, which meant that he maintained his innocence while admitting that prosecutors likely had enough evidence to secure a conviction against him. But this did not appear to be his first time impersonating a public official or falsifying his job position. In fact, he reportedly has a documented history of pretending to be a firefighter, lawyer, judge, EMT, military officer, and federal agent. And instead of taking ownership for his actions, Sinotti claimed in an interview with WECT that he was an auxiliary officer for the police department at the time of his arrest for making unauthorized traffic stops. Town officials, including the mayor and former police chief, were reluctant to speak with reporters about how Sinotti obtained access to a police vehicle despite his lack of qualifications and his history of deception. According to the most recent available updates, he remains a free man and is not currently the subject of any ongoing investigations. Number 1. Angel Marie Thompson. In 2007, a burning bag containing dismembered and beheaded human remains was found in Trope County, Georgia. The identity of the victim remained a mystery until December 2023, when genetic testing revealed that the individual was a long-missing woman named Nicole Alston. She vanished in Atlanta at the age of 24 several months before her body was found. In September 2024, authorities announced charges against Alston's friend, Angel Marie Thompson, who was accused of impersonating Alston for years following the woman's death. During that time, she collected hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of government benefits in Alston's name, including Social Security, food stamps, and subsidized housing. Thompson had stopped using Alston's identity in 2015 after Social Security instructed her to recertify her benefits. Following the identification of Alston's body, Thompson was charged with concealing the woman's death. The case appears to be ongoing, and it's unclear whether investigators believe Thompson played a role in causing Alston's death. Thanks for watching. And don't forget to let us know in the comments section below which topic you'd like to see next.